Welcome back to G Fun Facts Online. Today we are diving deep into a subject that fundamentally rewrites our understanding of the animal mind. We are going to talk about a study published in Science on February 5, 2026, involving a bonobo named Kanzi, a plastic pitcher, and the nature of reality itself. Let's get right into it. Imagine a scene that looks completely mundane. You are in a research facility in Iowa. Sitting at a table is a researcher, and across from her is a 43-year-old male bonobo named Kanzi. On the table, there are two empty cups and a plastic pitcher. The pitcher is clearly empty. There is no liquid in it. The researcher picks up this empty pitcher and mimics the motion of pouring liquid into one of the cups. She even makes the sound effects, saying glug, glug, glug. She sets the pitcher down, looks at Kanzi, and asks a question that, for centuries, science assumed no animal could meaningfully answer. She asks, "Where is the juice?" Kanzi does not hesitate. He points a long, dark finger at the cup the researcher just pretended to fill. He ignores the other cup, the one that remained empty in this shared fiction. This specific gesture, recorded in that 2026 study, shattered a barrier in cognitive science. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a conditioned response to a treat. It was evidence of something called Phantasia. This is the ability to visualize the non-existent, to hold a mental image in the mind's eye that contradicts the physical reality right in front of you. For the longest time, philosophers and scientists argued that imagination was the distinct spark of humanity. We called it the Promethean fire. It was the thing that allowed us to dream of gods, build empires, and fly to the moon. Animals, we were told, live in the tyranny of the now. They react to what they can see, smell, and touch. But Kanzi was not reacting to the now. He was reacting to a secondary representation, a shadow world created entirely inside his mind and shared with a human being. This implies that the roots of our creative capacity are far older than the human species itself. It suggests that in the deep forests of the Miocene era, 6 to 9 million years ago, our common ancestor was already beginning to dream. To really understand the magnitude of this, we have to dismantle our own familiarity with imagination. If you watch a human child, pretend play seems as natural as breathing. A toddler picks up a banana and answers it like a telephone. A preschooler rides a broomstick like a dragon. We call it child's play, but neurologically, it is a high-wire act of cognitive sophistication. This ability requires a process psychologists call decoupling. The brain has to hold two conflicting models of reality simultaneously. First, the primary representation, which is that the banana is a yellow fruit. And second, the secondary representation, which is that the banana is a phone. If the child confuses the two, they are hallucinating. If they cannot form the second, they are stuck in the literal world. The magic lies in the decoupling, knowing it is a fruit but treating it as a phone. For decades, the metacognitive gap hypothesis posited that while great apes are intelligent, they lacked this specific architecture. They were thought to be behaviorists by nature, solving problems through trial and error, but unable to simulate a counterfactual reality. The study led by Christopher Crupenye and Amalia Bastos dismantled this hypothesis. They didn't just ask Kanzi to play, they subjected him to a rigorous violation of expectation protocol. In one variation, the researcher pretended to pour juice into a cup, then pretended to dump that juice out, and then pretended to pour it back in. Kanzi had to track the invisible liquid through these invisible transfers. If he were merely pointing at the cup the researcher touched last, he would fail the complex sequences. But he didn't. He tracked the volume of the imaginary liquid. When offered a choice between a cup with invisible juice and a cup with invisible nothing, he consistently chose the juice. This indicates that Kanzi's brain is maintaining a persistent, manipulatable mental object. The juice exists in his mind. He can watch it move. He can see it spill. He can anticipate its taste. This is the definition of imagination, the presence of the absent. Now, let's talk about Kanzi himself, because to speak of bonobo imagination is to speak of him. Born in 1980, Kanzi is arguably the most enculturated non-human being on the planet. His life story reads like the biography of a genius discovered in the wild. Interestingly, Kanzi was not originally the subject of language research. His adoptive mother, Matata, was. Researchers tried for years to teach Matata to use lexicograms, which are abstract symbols representing words. Matata, having been captured in the wild as an adult, struggled to grasp the concept. But Kanzi, then an infant playing at her feet, was watching. One day, after Matata was moved away, Kanzi spontaneously began using the lexigram keyboard. He hadn't been taught. He had absorbed the system, much like a human child acquires language by listening to their parents. He didn't just ask for food. He commented on the world. He understood spoken English at the level of a young human child. If you told Kanzi to put the soap in the water, he would do it, even if he had never heard that specific sentence before. Over the decades, Kanzi has demonstrated abilities that blur the line between ape and human. He learned to fracture rocks to create sharp flakes for cutting rope, a skill our ancestors developed over 2 million years ago. He has engaged in musical jam sessions and created paintings with a deliberate sense of composition. In 2025, researchers showed that Kanzi possesses a theory of mind, meaning he understands when a human is ignorant of something. If a researcher dropped an object and didn't see where it went, Kanzi would guide them to it. But if the researcher did see it, Kanzi wouldn't bother. The Tea Party experiment we discussed earlier was the capstone of this career. It showed that Kanzi's use of symbols was not just a functional tool to get food. When Kanzi presses the lexigram for monster while wearing a mask and chasing a researcher, he is not warning of a predator. He is telling a scary story. He is engaging in performance art. If Kanzi can imagine, where does that imagination live in the brain? Since we cannot easily slide a bonobo into an fMRI machine while he plays a pretend tea party, we look to comparative neuroscience. The findings align with evidence concerning the default mode network. In humans, this network lights up when we are not focused on the outside world. It is the daydreaming network, active when we remember the past or imagine the future. Recent studies of primate brains show that the precuneus, a hub for mental imagery and self-consciousness, shares a similar intrinsic architecture in apes as it does in humans. It connects the decision-making prefrontal cortex to sensory integration areas. This suggests the wiring for internal visualization was laid down long before we became human. Furthermore, imagination is often described by neuroscientists as mental time travel. To imagine a pretend tea party, you essentially cut and paste memories from the past. The hippocampus, famous for memory storage, is the engine of this process. Studies show that when rats or apes sleep, their hippocampi replay the routes they took that day, and sometimes pre-play routes they plan to take. Kanzi's ability to track invisible juice likely piggybacks on this spatial memory system. He is remembering the location of the juice, even though the juice isn't there. We also see the presence of von Economo neurons in bonobos. These specialized neurons, found in high concentrations in humans, elephants, and whales, are linked to social intuition. They allow for rapid processing of complex social situations. While not solely responsible for imagination, their presence supports the idea that bonobos have the high-speed neural circuitry required for social simulations, of which pretend play is a variant. However, there are differences. The arcuate fasciculus, the white matter highway connecting language processing areas, is much more robust in humans. This allows us to attach complex recursive grammar to our imagination. Kanzi can imagine the juice, but a human can imagine a juice that grants eternal life. The content of our imagination is richer due to language, but the mechanism of imagining appears to be a shared heritage. This brings us to an interesting evolutionary question. Why bonobos? Why is it Kanzi, a bonobo, who has become the avatar of ape imagination rather than a chimpanzee? Chimpanzees and bonobos share nearly all their DNA, but they diverged about 1 to 2 million years ago and developed radically different psychological profiles. Chimpanzees are patriarchal, aggressive, and xenophobic. Bonobos, often called the hippie apes, are matriarchal, egalitarian, and resolve conflict through social bonding and play. Evolutionary anthropologists hypothesize that the bonobo's self-domestication might be the key to their imaginative potential. This is known as the survival of the friendliest hypothesis. Reduced aggression leads to a prolonged juvenile period. Bonobos retain childlike traits, or neoteny, into adulthood. They are playful, curious, and socially flexible throughout their lives. Play is the crucible of imagination. In a violent environment like that of the chimpanzee, vigilance is costly. You cannot afford to daydream if a rival male might ambush you. But, in the safer, food-rich forests where bonobos evolved, social bonding was the currency of survival. This release from aggression may have freed up cognitive resources for complex forms of play. When adult bonobos play blind man's bluff or engage in intricate grooming games, they are exercising the default mode network. Kanzi's success in the imagination test might be a direct result of his species' evolutionary pivot toward playfulness. He is biologically predisposed to say yes and, which is the first rule of improv comedy and pretend play. Skeptics might argue that Kanzi is a fluke, a product of living in a lab. But is there evidence of this in the wild? While we cannot interview wild bonobos, ethologists have recorded behaviors that suggest latent imagination. In the Kanyawara community of wild chimpanzees, young females have been observed carrying sticks for hours. They do not use them for termites or digging. They cradle them. They build nests for them. They treat them exactly as mothers treat infants. This behavior ceases once they have real babies. It is hard to interpret this as anything other than imaginative roleplay, essentially saying, "This stick is my baby." We have also seen the famous rain dances observed by Jane Goodall, where chimpanzees perform rhythmic displays during thunderstorms, hurling rocks at the invisible enemy of the thunder. This implies a projection of agency onto the inanimate world. And then there is mourning. Bonobos and chimps have been seen cleaning the teeth of dead relatives and guarding their bodies. To mourn is to imagine a presence that is no longer there. It is the flip side of the invisible juice, tracking a being who has vanished from the physical world but remains in the mental one. These anecdotes suggest that the enculturated Kanzi is not acquiring a new power, but unlocking a dormant one. The capacity to overlay the physical world with a mental one is likely a standard feature of the pangenus operating system. It is usually utilized for social maneuvering, like figuring out what another ape is thinking, but it is flexible enough to handle make-believe when the environment encourages it. The implications of this reverberate backward through time. If bonobos can imagine, and humans can imagine, then the capacity was likely present in the last common ancestor, a mysterious ape that lived in the dense African rainforests 6 to 9 million years ago. We used to view this ancestor as a creature of instinct. Now, we must view it as a dreamer. This rewrites the story of human evolution. We did not invent imagination. We weaponized it. The ape version was used for social play and mental time travel. The human version took that same cognitive machinery and dialed it up. We used secondary representation not just to track invisible Jews, but to track invisible herds of mammoth for hunting strategies. We used it to see tools within stones. We used it to create spirits, laws, and nations. The Great Leap Forward, the explosion of art and culture 50,000 years ago, was perhaps not the birth of imagination, but the scaling of it. We added language to the mix, allowing us to export our phantasms from one brain to another. The revelation of Bonobo Phantasia forces a profound philosophical reckoning. For millennia, we have used the mental wall to justify our dominion over nature. We think, they react. We create, they consume. We have imagination, they have instincts. Kanzi, looking for the invisible juice, dissolves this wall. It suggests that the inner life of an ape is not a dark, empty room, but a theater. If a bonobo can imagine a better future, does keeping him in a cage constitute a specific kind of psychological torture? If they can pretend, they can likely hope and dread in ways more complex than we assumed. And if an ape can share a fiction with a human, what does that say about our reality? Much of human life is pretend play. Money is paper we pretend has value. Laws are rules we pretend exist. We are the species that took the bonobo game of invisible juice and built a civilization out of it. We are not separate from nature. We are just the most intense role players in the primate family. In the forests of the Congo right now, a bonobo is weaving a nest high in the canopy. He looks out over the mist. We do not know exactly what he is thinking. Perhaps he is planning where to find figs tomorrow. Perhaps he is replaying a grooming session from yesterday. Or perhaps, just for a moment, he is imagining something that isn't there. A ghost in the leaves. A game to play. A future yet to come. Kanzi has shown us that the lights are on behind those eyes. The ability to escape the prison of the present moment is not a unique human gift. It is a legacy we share. We are not the only dreamers on this planet. We are simply the ones who woke up and wrote it down. As we look at the invisible cup in Kanzi's hand, we see a bridge across 6 million years of time, connecting our minds to theirs in the shared, shimmering space of the imagination. That wraps up today's episode of Fun Facts Online. Thanks for listening.